Welcome to the fourth virtual event of our series, Latino Design Histories. The purpose of this series is to feature the diverse histories of design in Latin America and the critical research that is being produced on the topic. This event is the result of a collaboration between SoDA, AIGA Baltimore, with the support of Stevenson University, AIGA Unidos, and the Design History Society. My name is Raquel Castedo, and I'm a member of SoDA, Society of Design Arts, and AIGA Baltimore. So I want to tell you a little bit about SoDA. It was founded over 15 years ago in Baltimore and has provided more than 100 programs that have explored diverse subjects related to art and design histories. For a better idea of our past programs, please check out our website at sodabaltimore.com. And while you're there, sign up on our mailing list to find out about future events. We are very excited to have you today. We know that we have people attending from different time zones. The speakers themselves, they are in different continents. So it's really exciting to have all this collaboration happening here. A special thank you to all the volunteers involved in this event. We would not be able to produce it without your help. Also, thank you to our interpreters, Julieta Mendes, Laura Lafuente, Melissa Ruffini, and Paula Vasili, who are translating the events to Portuguese and Spanish. Now, I'd like to introduce you Frances Miller, who is the president of AIGA Baltimore, and will tell you a little bit about AIGA. Welcome, Frances.
Hi, thank you, Raquel. Thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah, I'm the president of AIGA Baltimore. Raquel is one of our board members as well. So thankful for all of her work on this series. We've been pleased to support it. So AIGA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our goal is to advance design as a professional craft, a strategic advantage, and a vital cultural force. So we are here in Baltimore, Maryland. We're just one of 75 chapters run entirely by volunteer leaders, serving members across the US. I'm sure you're not all in Maryland or probably not all in the US. So you can find more information and tons of online virtual events happening at aiga.org. And one of the biggest benefits of volunteering or joining the AIGA community is you can get to know a lot of really passionate people and collaborate even with other chapters. So with us today, and one of our partners is AIGA Unidos. So Anthony is going to tell us a bit about this collaboration.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Anthony Wellborn. I'm representing AIGA Unidos, which is a multi-chapter collaboration that really is trying to create a space to empower and elevate and celebrate the lives and work, stories, and the needs of creatives with Latinx and Hispanic cultural heritage. We are beyond grateful to have Raquel have us be able to partner with this event, and I'd love to pass it back to her and so we can dive into this magnificent content she's prepared for us.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you for the collaboration with AIGA Unidos. Has been really important for us. We are collaborating with Stevenson University as well in the series. And in this specific event, and I hope it's, we continue collaborating with Design History Society from the UK. So we're very thankful for all these partnerships that we have been, working on. And I want to welcome our speakers. Before I do that, I just want to let you know that this event will last about 1.5 hours. We have a little bit more time than usual. That's something that participants said that they would like to have more time for questions. So because of our sponsors and the partnerships, we were able to have our interpreters longer with us. So feel free to send your questions at any point, and we hope to have a great conversation with Livia and Patricia. After their talk, we're gonna hold a Q&A session. So send your questions in any, in English, Portuguese, or Spanish. We're gonna translate if necessary. So let's get started. I wanna first introduce Patricia. Dr. Patricia Lara-Betancourt is a design historian and member of the Modern Interiors Research Center at Kingston University in London since 2008. She studied Colombian and Latin American history at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana and Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and worked as a university lecturer in Colombia from 1990 to 1997. We're gonna share in the chat a couple of her publications if you wanna dig deeper. Hi, Patricia, welcome.
Hello, Raquel. Hello, everybody.
Hello, thank you so much. Patricia is in London right now, right? So it's
That's
night
right.
For you.
Yes, 9:10. Yes. Should I
Thank
start sharing my screen now?
Yes, and then I'm gonna introduce Livia as soon as you finish your presentation.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for being here today. Thank you, Raquel, for inviting us to be part of the AIGA talk series. We are delighted with this opportunity to talk about our work for the special issue on Latin America and the Caribbean. First, we'd like to acknowledge the contribution of all the colleagues involved in this publication, including Grace Lima Fay, who encouraged and guided us in submitting a proposal to the journal. The editorial board with Professor Penny Spark as chair, Fiona Fisher as managing editor, Priscilla Farias, and the many blind reviewers who so generously supported us. As you know, publishing is always a team effort. Although the issue was published in 2019, our work on it really started 5 years earlier. We wanted to develop a network of like-minded researchers, mainly through convening conference panels. We had a very robust response to our call for papers, which was really encouraging. We convened a double panel on the theme of autonomy at the SLAS Society for Latin American Studies conference in Aberdeen, Scotland in 2015. We asked speakers to go beyond the center-periphery model and the idea of Latin America as an autonomous region defined only in industrial development terms. We followed that effort with a panel at the Design History Society conference in San Francisco in September the same year. We persevered with the theme of autonomy, the title of our panel being The Utopia of Autonomy. And from a transnational perspective, our papers explored mid-20th century discourses on design and regional development. Also at the same time, between 2014 and 2016, we noticed a distinct increase in the number of exhibitions about architecture, design, art, and craft in Latin America, both in the UK and in the US. Here, for example, in this slide, you see the exhibitions that took place in New York, Latin America in construction for the period there, Moderno, Design for Living in Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela, at the America Society, and New Territories, which had a more contemporary flavor. Regarding the timeliness of this issue, and in terms of publications, we want to point out that in the past 10 years, exciting design historical research has been emerging in and about Latin America. As you see in the center of this slide, a key disseminating initiative has been the book Historia del Diseño en América Latina y el Caribe, co-edited by Silvia Fernández and Guy Punsiepe. As far as we know, this is the first comprehensive effort to address the whole region, both from a national and Latin American perspective. It is encouraging to see that in the last 3 decades, with the rise of design postgraduate programs and research centers in the region, there has been a growing number of disseminating efforts, not just through publications, but also through conference biennials and exhibitions. The Journal of Design History has been committed to globalize the discipline for over a decade and was keen to support a special number focusing on a region that had not been prominent in previous issues. What we wanted was to create a wider awareness and contribute to the understanding of design histories in Latin America. So, aligned with the journal's mission, our most important aims were to contribute to globalize design historical discourses that integrate the Latin American region, to address a gap in the historiography of Latin America's design history, until now mostly driven by a focus on national design histories. In connection to that, to foster transnational debates and comparisons, to balance a nation-based focus with an emphasis on global exchanges, to continue to challenge the dichotomy of center-peripheries by subverting the Eurocentric and Western-centric perspective that sees the center as the source of innovation and the periphery as a place of passive imitation. In tandem with the above, to question colonialist thinking and a historiography that has favored modernization theory to interpret Latin America experiences and material culture. And last, to examine Latin American agency within processes of appropriation, adaptation, and hybridization. In the introduction to the special issue, we give a historiographical review based on a representative group of journals and articles published in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. We identified trends, themes, sources, and methodologies. And 2 significant trends emerged from our analysis. First, the study of design history as one of modernization linked, therefore, to nation-building efforts. And second, the study of modern design, its professionalization and education. So I will refer now to the first of these trends by placing it in context. National histories of design have been a common format to reflect on design history. From a preliminary analysis of most articles in our sample for the period 1990 to 2018, we identified that until around 2010, there has been a significant national approach to studies in the region. Although necessary and valuable, a strict focus on national histories can be limiting and has hindered having a larger perspective of the wider region and its rich web of interconnections. We think that a comprehensive study of Latin America and the Caribbean needs to be more than the sum or juxtaposition of its parts. It is also problematic that in many instances, this nationalist methodology is linked to modernization themes and theories. Subordinating the region's production of knowledge on design to the country's modernizing efforts has resulted in a prevailing understanding of design, mostly as a product of modern industrial societies. Moreover, the link between modernity and nation building is problematic because, in being political and ideological, it is narrow and fails to identify and understand the region's complex history and reality. Following Garcia Canclini, we think we should see Latin American culture as the result of indigenous, European, and African traditions interacting with modern political, socioeconomic, and media forces. And we should see it less as a result of the drive to develop and modernize. Latin America has engaged fully with cultural modernism, but at the same time has never quite achieved complete socioeconomic modernization. In this, making a stark contrast with Europe and North America. In sum, we endorse different perspectives from those that have deemed the region as subaltern to Western ideals and, as mentioned before, focus instead on global exchanges as an alternative to colonialist thinking. This publication foregrounds the notion of exchanges as the guiding principle for a study into the material culture and design in and from the region. Exchanges defined as the movement, meetings and encounters of goods, ideas, cultural practices, and peoples. Exchanges refer to a reciprocal process that implies transfer, transmission, and imputation, but also appropriation, adoption, adaptation, and hybridization. We think that the notion of exchanges allows a more comprehensive picture of how culture and design are created, recreated, and transformed in a continuous process of giving and taking that affects all parties. To end my part of the presentation, I'd like now to give you a brief mention of the articles included in this special issue and highlight their main contributions in terms of foregrounding Latin American agency and the notion of exchanges. Verónica de Valle discusses the fundamental role that the artist, designer, and theoretician Tomás Maldonado played in the emergence of design theory in Latin America, and his contribution as director of the German school Hochschule für Gestaltung, HFG, in Ulm in the 1950s. Her article examines Maldonado as a leading figure in the Argentine avant-garde group Arte Concreto Invención in the 1940s. It examines his fruitful networking relationship with Max Bill and his work as lecturer and director of the HFG. The argument focuses on Nueva Visión magazine, directed by Maldonado, and also on the Nueva Visión publishing house, founded in 1954. Adriana Macida gives a revealing example of design exchanges in urban planning housing in Buenos Aires. Her article examines the Parque Almirante Brown housing program, PAB or PAP, in the context of international debates about informal settlements. Her analysis shows how this housing program brought together elements from different design and planning traditions, local and international, including those by the CIAM, the International Congress of Modern Architecture. Macida frames the PAP program as one of, I quote here, creative appropriation, understood as the selective adoption of modernist precepts by local authorities who used modernism to portray themselves as the epitome of modernity. Erika Morowski analyzes how the local and global can be articulated beyond simplistic one-way influence interpretations. She analyzes the design and redesign of the iconic Cuban nightclub Tropicana by the architect Max Borges in the 1950s. Morowski's key contribution in terms of agency and complex exchanges is her conceptualization of, I quote, cosmopolitan Cubanidad, a Cuban identity shaped by a cosmopolitan view of itself within the larger world. Interestingly, the author proposes this reading as a model and methodology to understand similar buildings and cultures in other Latin American and Caribbean countries. In their article, Nicole Cristian, Javier Mance, Araneda studied two of the most prolific and little-known graphic collectives during the dictatorship in Chile from 1973 to 1989, the Agrupación de Plásticos Jóvenes and the Taller Sol Cultural Center. They, the authors, examined the production of political posters and particularly the technical and socio-relational aspects of these two collectives, who were successful in avoiding Pinochet's dictatorial regime. They also make a crucial methodological contribution to the archival reconstruction of marginalized pasts. By carrying out interviews and workshops with the poster producers, they refined a participatory methodology that allowed them to investigate the designers' experiences and collective memories. And last, Tania Messel examines the archives of the International Council of Societies of Industrial Design, ICSID, to give a detailed reconstruction of its development policies and centralized structure. Her discussion focuses on the Congress held in Mexico City in 1979 to reveal how a group of Latin American designers challenged ICSID's development policies and went on to create ALADI, the Latin American Design Organization formed to promote local economic and cultural independence. The founding of ALADI subverted ICSID's understanding of assistance, in which design knowledge that originated in industrialized nations was to be transferred to an expanding local Latin American industry. Thank you all for listening. Now I hand you over to Livia, who will discuss further the intellectual and methodological aims of the special issue and its afterlife, including the impact of the special issue on current scholarship. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much. I'm gonna introduce Livia, and then we're gonna start her, her part of the presentation. So Dr. Livia Rezende is a design historian living in Gadigal land and working at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. She co-founded Open, an art and design collective for decolonial praxis. She is new formats editor of the Journal of Design History and book review editor of the Journal of Modern Crafts. And we're gonna also be sharing in the chat some of her publications. So I will be sharing Livia's presentation from my end. So let me test it, open it now.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I join you today from unceded Gadigal land. And I'll be segueing Patricia's presentation with, and let's just see my slides go up. Thanks, everyone. So I'd like to thank also Patricia for your thorough presentation on this formation of our research network and editorial project. As you could see from her presentation, it's been a longer, larger, broader, much more complex project than just the publication of the special issue. I'll segue Patricia's talk with a reflection of what we could call the afterlife of the project. So what's happened since? I mean, it's only been 2 years since the project has been published. However, lots have changed, especially in the particular geographical region we are talking about. And I'll also reflect today on the impact that some of these ideas proposed by the publication has been having in the field and beyond. So since its publication in early 2019, Latin Americans have lived some of the most significant political changes since at least the mid of the 20th century. Events like Brazilian President-elect Dilma Rousseff's ousting in 2016 have been driven by an unprecedented rise of neoconservatism in the region. Raquel, could you change the slide, please? Thank you, that's the one. So these are not only political or partisan events, They result in increasing racism, gendered violence, indigenous genocide, and after the COVID outbreak, the death of millions of Latin Americans due to social media-driven misinformation, negationism, and anti-scientificism. This new social context then poses a pressing question for us today. What ideas, methods, and objectives raised by the special issue on Latin American design history remain relevant for designers, design historians, and those concerned with Latin American culture more broadly? So I'll start addressing this question by pulling a provocative proposition from the publication, where we said, Latin America's past is much longer and complex than its history. Past and history may at times be used interchangeably, but they are indeed very different phenomena. We, as readers of history, recognize this difference when we find in archives or collections evidence of past lives or material culture practices that have not been investigated or written about. And I believe many in this room today are historians or would have encountered some of these lost evidences of the past. In other words, this proposition that we see on the screen becomes clearer when we find clues of the past that do inform the present, but have not yet been seen. Also, we can recognize the difference between past and history when the history we read does not address our own lived experiences or our understanding of the past. In saying that Latin America's past is much longer and complex than its history, we have proposed in the special issue, alongside its authors, that Latin America's past, and in particular its material and visual culture past, have not yet been comprehensively and satisfactorily researched, interpreted, and disseminated. The pressing issue nowadays is, with the current dismantling of higher education institutions, public education, and research centers in places like Brazil, where the federal financial support for scientific research has been cut by 90%, 90%. We have to ask then, what is the position design professional, researcher, and historian can take to continue writing the region's long and complex past into its history? So I'll return to this question in the end, and hopefully this will also form the basis for our conversation. The special issue's impact and relevance can also be felt in its in-depth discussion of design history in, from, and of the region published in the English language. And here I'm going to be reiterating some of the points already raised by Patricia, but with this idea of its relevance to 2021. The historiography of Latin American Caribbean design history has been shaped by this recurrent focus on national design histories that Patricia was mentioning, and on case studies focused on a particular geographical or a temporal context. The scarcity of large projects attempting at finding points of contact among comparable cultural experiences has limited the research scope of the field in the field of design. Also, this scarcity has hindered the emergence of critical broad perspectives that include the wider region and, crucially, its rich web of interconnections. And this is such a dear phrasing for us, it's worth repeating. So this is why special issue has the explicit ethos of foregrounding exchange and agency when exploring Latin American design's past. Exchange is here employed as a key concept to test the prevalence of terms and approaches from previous modernist historiographies that dominated the field for several years. In these modernist histories, design was framed as a modern, solely industrial activity which had arrived in the region around the mid-20th century, with pioneers from abroad who brought with them the terms and ways of making that were to be adopted while the region underwent rampant modernization. In fact, modernization and the adhesion of the region to a modern way of living which we now understand as dangerously unsustainable, was, according to the modernist canon, predicated on the adoption and consumption of modern things, modern images, and modern habits. Design history then prevailed as the history of the profession of pioneers of design works that fit the modernist canons, with the additional consequence of invalidating any other design work that did not fit that canon. And here we can nod to the keynote offered by Raquel Castedo in the Latino Design Histories series a few months ago, when he detailed how historical research based on the unearthing and investigation of artifacts, such as those illustrated magazines from the 1920s, how they have debunked the claim of primacy and pioneerism of modern designers. Returning to the approach sustained by the special issue, the concept of exchange helps us ask nowadays, what else has happened in Latin America's long and complex past that has been invalidated by that canon, but that nonetheless it still impacts our present? The concept of exchange also helps us explore design production in the region, not as a copy or an importation of foreign models, as Patricia did mention, but to see it as a reciprocal process in a complex global web of interdependence. These are preoccupations which are methodological in nature. That is to say, they stem not only from the interpretative outcomes of historical research, but rather these points are preoccupied with how and why we make history, and with the impact of history making on our conceptualization of design, on design practice, and more broadly on our current social, cultural, and educational contexts. Employing a global historical methodological framework, our publication and research project subscribes to the idea, in the words of Glenn Adamson, George Riello, and Sarah Teasley, that design as a practice and product exists wherever there is human activity. And here we go to the last point I wanted to make regarding how the ideas put forward by the publication have been reverberating loudly. If, as said, design as a practice and product exists wherever there is human activity, as we contend, then activities from First Nation or enslaved African peoples who populated Latin America during its colonial and post-colonial periods is a glaring or blind spot in the historiography that does not include them. So concluding this part of my reflection on the publication's relevance and impact, I'd like to return to a quote we've employed at the start of the introduction to the special issue, and it reads, you can accompany me on the slide. In Caddo indigenous knowledge, the white people have been the advent of Caddo's own bad choices. Auke, rejected by his community for his powers of transformation, tried several times to please the community to no avail. He wanted his people to possess the firearm, the plate, and all the material culture universe that nowadays is in the hands of the white people. Auke's grandfather, however, rejected the offer, choosing instead the ark and the gourd. Thus, the white people gained the possibility to create cities and possess technology, and in this way subjugate the indigenous people. As the Cairo have suggested, when thinking about a decolonial proposition for design and design history in the region, we might become aware of design not only as an expensive and innovative creative activity, as we like to call it, but we might also have to accept that for many, and if not for most, design represents a path for destruction. So in the next part of my talk, I'll explore the ways in which the Locating Design Exchanges in Latin America and the Caribbean project has also impacted a design history scholarship that goes beyond that involved with historical developments in the region. In this next part of my talk, I'll explore other ways in which the Locating Design Exchanges in Latin America and the Caribbean project has also impacted a design history scholarship that goes beyond those involved with historical developments in the region. A good example is in the publication Material Displacements, the latest special issue of the Journal of Design History, edited by Sarah Lichtman and Gilly Traganou, both from Parsons School of Design in the New School in New York. So this is just out, fresh off the press, and I believe there will be sort of free downloads with during the period in which it's being out. So do check the website of the Journal of Design History to catch up with this lovely new special issue. And in framing their own project, Lichtman and Traganou refer to the contribution that the studies of design history in Latin America to the discipline more broadly have made. In their words, the Locating Design Exchanges in Latin America and the Caribbean special issue denounces the current framing of Latin American and Caribbean design as a product of one-directional influences received from so-called centers of production and understood as second-rate versions of an European or United States ideal. The editors follow Walter Mignolo's understanding of Western modernity as a fiction, a worldview and a life way pertained to a certain group of people, however naturalized and normalized as reality. And they look for race experiences, temporalities, and specialities other than those enforced by colonialists and their descendants since the 16th century. The editors also emphasize the imperative of the recognition of the enslavement of indigenous people and the forced diaspora of enslaved African populations in the region, and join border thinkers in calling out oppressive attitudes in design practice and discourse, endeavoring for scholarly and designerly production that would advance the pluriversality where the coexistence of different worlds would be possible. So in sum, the study of design history in Latin America need not to provincialize the region or remains relevant only for those working closely with this geography. A methodological emphasis on the exchanges and agency in design will serve current projects interested in unpacking the mechanisms of coloniality, colonization, and modernization, to name a few. And to conclude and open up this space for further conversation, I should also say the exchange today, I will finish my talk with propositions for where the scholarship in this area is heading. Design history in Latin America has been alive, well, and thriving for the last 20 years or more. No longer an emerging or incipient discipline, it has moved away from the straitjackets of being centered solely on those terms imposed by histories of modernization, modernity, or modernism, and it has also expanded beyond the well-trodden areas such as graphic design histories or histories of design education. So where is the scholarship heading thematically and methodologically? One key methodological opportunity that we have faced is that of archival preservation and undertaking oral histories with practitioners, educators, and other contributors to the field of design, who may not have registered their lived experiences in production in written documentation. There is also some critical archival work to be done where censorship and the silencing of historical events or documents, or even neglect, have threatened the writing of histories. Here we can nod again to the fantastic keynote supported by the Latino Design History series, the one by Nicole Christie and Javier Amanzi, titled Design and Political Resistance in Chile, where they discuss their challenges and commitment to writing the histories of clandestine political posters during the Chilean military dictatorship. Already mentioned as a glaring blind spot in our histories, the colonial period, although significantly explored by other areas of history, is still less disseminated and explored within design. Indigenous knowledge and culture, cultures of Black diaspora, and histories of popular craft are also point to the necessity to rethink social, ethnic, and cultural hierarchies established from previous historiographical approaches. The previous historiographical emphasis on modernization and nation building has largely elided inquiries into censorship, exile, democracy, and citizenry in the context of 20th century military dictatorships. This has been a dear area of study for me, in which I have been collaborating with colleagues in Brazil and beyond. Further investigations into the establishment and the development of modern design in the region under military dictatorships is dearly needed, as well as the reactivation of the United States Monroe Doctrine during the 20th century, a period of neo-colonial incursions from the US military and its cultural soft powers over the continent. Employing the lenses of agency and exchange, there is much room for thorough and robust investigation into that decade between the early 60s and the 70s, when democracies like the Chilean under Allende coexisted with already established and brutal dictatorships, regimes like the Brazilian one that had been installed in 1964. There is also room for design historians to tone down some weak disciplinary boundaries between design and art, to investigate artistic strategies and cultural interventions that tap into mass communication and mass production, understood typically as areas of design knowledge and practice. And finally, our conversation today and the Latino Design History series would not have been possible without the work of original research based on archival investigation, oral histories, and the critical analysis of historiographies and methodologies. This work, typically a result of academic research executed within design schools and universities, has become increasingly reliant on another agent in the infrastructure of criticism and knowledge production. And here I'm talking about the learned societies, like the Society of Design Arts, AIGA Baltimore, or as you say in English, AIGA Baltimore, and the Design History Society. The higher education sector broadly, and the humanities in particular, have been under attack in the last decade, if not increasing in the last few years. And this is not just happening in Latin America, but it's also happening across the globe, as a direct result of the rise of neoconservatism and fascism. So in this green context, the learned societies have been playing a crucial role in disseminating research and communicating to the general public and fomenting exchange among researchers in varied constituencies. And it's to, as a matter of thanks for the Design History Society, AIGA Baltimore, and the Society of Design Arts that I conclude the lecture today and open up for discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Livia. And thank you, Patricia, for your presentations and for your work. Was a great surprise to find the issue, the special issue you edited when I found it. And you did such a great job of making this introduction on the issue that you're sharing with us. And I'm really interested in learning more, and would like to start our conversation with this concept of design exchanges that you brought, Patricia. You started explaining how the collaboration happened and the network, but if you could dig a little bit deeper in this idea of design exchanges, if it was a concept that, how long have you been using that? Where else you have been using it? And because it's especially, I think, important for in the US, also the research about design here too. So if you could comment on that and tell us about it.
Should I start then? and
Yes.
perhaps Livia can follow it. I think it sounds like a simple concept, simple notion, exchange. And I like it precisely because of that. It's one word, it's simple. We understand what it means. At the same time, I think it's so powerful because it can subvert a way of thinking, and it can really question a colonial type of thinking. Because given the historiography and the canons in the literature, we are used to seeing this discourse repeated about great things happen somewhere else, and then we feel the consequences, and then we copy and imitate or are influenced, and it sounds so very passive, as if history happens and we're not really part of it. We're almost like spectators, and it is a pervasive and negative way of reading history. So by introducing the notion of exchange, then you immediately bring things into a more balanced approach, because it's about giving and taking. We talk about, for example, we talk about the West, and in so many readings, so many articles, I wonder, are we including Latin America as part of the West? Are we not the West? And why aren't we, if that's the implicit assumption? And also, in the name of America, when we say America, people understand it's the United States, but we are here as well. We are part of America. So yes, we have the notion of the Americas, but I think there is an imperialist sense there in how to name the territories. So going back to your question, Raquel, I think it's a very exciting notion to be working with, because it obliges you to think, okay, we have been part of European history since the 16th century, because before that we were not in contact with the rest of the world. So instead of saying that we have been influenced and we were given a language, we were given a religion, we were given cultural practices, I think it's healthier and better to think we have co-created this world. So it's really an invitation to see how that co-creation has happened and how we have equally influenced those who have influenced us. And that's a new kind of research that I think it's definitely worthwhile exploring.
Definitely. Livia, would you like to comment on that? Because we have a question, we have a couple of questions, and we have one that I think is connected to this one, but I want to hear you. Have you worked with this concept, design exchanges? Because it appears in different articles and I really invite everybody that it's with us to download have access to the articles, because they're open, they're free during the month of November, especially for, because of the event. So I really invite you to do that. And it appears in a couple of articles. So I would like to hear you too.
Sure, Raquel, and hello again, everyone. Yes, in fact, it is the underpinning concept for the whole of the special issue. So in a way, all articles, to a certain extent, will talk about this. And exchange here is not just international exchange. We have the article by Nicole Christian, Javier Amanzi, for instance, look at all the aspects of this of a much more sort of internal, emergent, urgent nature. But your question is really important, because I also think there's something here we still haven't talked about, which is from the positions from which Patricia and myself speak. We have been away from Latin America to a certain extent in physical terms for a while. So Patricia and I met a while ago when I was still living in London and working there, and that's how we got together for this project. And so I feel that this viewpoint from two Latin Americanists working from outside the region has also helped us conceptualize and strengthen our beliefs in this concept and in this methodology. Because, and I give here a bit of an anecdote, which I think is going to be close to home for your audience in the United States. When I was doing my previous research, which is not the one I mentioned, that is to do with the military dictatorship, and establishment of modern design. That's my current one. But my previous research was on the international exhibitions and world fairs. And obviously the United States has been a major player in this kind of global geopolitics of world spheres. And when I was studying the 1893 exhibition of Chicago, the Colombian exhibition in the White City, I was taken aback by the employment of Beaux-Arts and French, classicist, new kind of a new classicist style in that moment in history, where the United States is really becoming an incredible, powerful military presence in Latin America in general, but in the world as well. So it's the expansion of capitalism in US. And US power, and the exhibition was in itself a result and a demonstration of that. And yet they were using French classicism as the national, as the way of portraying this to the world. And that really intrigued me, because if, as we had been in education, in design education in Brazil, we had been raised under the understandings, under the implications that these were copying mechanisms, it doesn't feel like it adds up. I mean, if it's a copying or an importation mechanism, to be appropriating some of these styles, international styles, for display of your own national power. So it seems to have been a mechanism that was used to describe the history of, say, the modernization of Rio de Janeiro in the turn of the century, when a similar Beaux-Arts style was being used for some of the urban reforms in Rio. So on the one hand, we had a concept that was using as copying and as importation. And on the other hand, we had the same sort of stylistic and design mechanism that was being portrayed and framed in a very different way. So that was what intrigued me. And I started to realize that these mechanisms of explanation, so the methodologies that we are using, the concepts we are using to explain certain exchanges in design, also reflected the power dynamic of who decides that this is copy and imitation, and who decides that this is actually appropriation and an empowerment or display of power. So that's how it kind of started for me, and it's been a long-going and a lifelong intriguing sort of decoupling of these methods and how they have been used in history. One last point to talk about, but I'll just leave it at that, because I'm sure we'll have time to come back to it, is about education as well. I think I have always had straddled research and education my whole career. And when we talk about design, especially to a very recent cohort of Brazilian designers, as I had the experience to teach in Brazil in 2012, these questions are very much coming from that generation as well, discussions of more self-determination. And so I think that's the other reason that impelled us to put it together in the special issue.
So I'm interested, like could you explain better what this generation that were your students were interested in learning more?
That's such a great question. You know why? Because I was lucky enough to have returned to Brazil in a period where the makeup of the studentship in the particular design school where I was teaching has changed radically. And that was because the positive affirmative policy that was introduced in some state universities in the Rio de Janeiro state in the early 2000s. And through this policy, the design school, which was a public, is currently still a public institution in Brazil called the AIGA, the Escola Superior de Design Industrial, where I was teaching, had for the first time in its 60 years of history, specific quotas for Black or Indigenous or students coming from lower socioeconomics. That has changed the makeup of the school completely. So for the first time, when I was there in the 90s, I was studying as a designer, as a design student, as a young design student. The social makeup and the racial makeup and the ethnic makeup of the design school was very homogeneous, was white, was middle class, despite being a public institution, but it had a certain selection process that enabled only those privileged few to enter the school. And with the policy of positive affirmation and the quotas for Black, Indigenous, and low socioeconomic students, we had to really switch, or I think that whole idea of what we were doing was switched on its head very, very, very positively, because it's quite embarrassing to say so, but for the first time we had a much more representative makeup of Brazil in the classroom, and that put a lot of questions to us. As curriculum designers, as people who select the reading list, who select the examples we are going to give in the classroom, who select what actually matters for their education as designers and for the history that we are making. So this exchange with the studentship has been absolutely, a radical different mode of thinking and approaching design education and writing.
Yeah, and that's very important too, because you know, as you're telling this story, I remember, because I was still in Brazil when that shift happened. I was in between, between being an undergrad and then a graduate student. So I definitely remember the challenges of positively adapting the syllabi and rethinking who is represented in this, in the syllabi and the references, the bibliography and all that. And that's crucial, right, for understanding this exchanges that we're talking about. I was wondering, Patricia, if you do, how do you perceive that? I know that for a long time you've been out of Colombia, right, from Latin America. How do you perceive these changes that, if they happen to in the demographics of the design schools and in Colombia as well, or what's your experience with that?
Because I don't live in Colombia, I don't have first-hand experience of it. What I hear is that more design programs have emerged in the past 20 years, and that more students are interested in studying design or careers, design-related careers, courses, sorry. But thinking about design history, I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think that there is anywhere in our universities in Colombia where you could go and study design history as such. You enroll as a student in any area of design, and there are many, and it's thriving, and the interest in design is really strong. Fashion, for example, but also graphic design. And then perhaps one of your tutors will teach you design history. But if you want to train or to become a design historian, we don't have the infrastructure or the possibility to do that, not in our universities.
So it's still like kind of a new field, or a field that needs more investment, and right. We have a couple of questions from the audience that I would like to start addressing too. And I'd like to ask you, Patricia, first, how do you navigate research and scholarship in a multilingual way? how we make sure that these efforts are translated, or will English be always the dominant language for publishing the results?
What a great and difficult question.
Thank you, just want to thank you, Camila Afanadorlach. I'm probably saying your name wrong. Thank you so much for the question.
Yes, great question. And I think this is something we all struggle with when we are not English native speakers. I think yes, the negative side is obvious, isn't it? If we don't speak that language, if we're not familiar with the language, then we will struggle if that is the main language in which design historical scholarship is published. But having said that, I think there is an advantage in having a kind of universal language, or because that's the way it is. It means that it is a kind of universal language. Somebody said jokingly that the most spoken language in the world is bad English. But it is a language that has allowed so many of us to communicate. So I think what we need to focus then is on, for example, what Livia and I did with this special issue, and the the Journal of Design History did and supported us in this, is to really spend the time and effort to help anybody who's not an English native speaker to be able to publish in the journal, because it's not easy and it is a lot of work, because we have different ways of thinking and of writing when we do it in Spanish or in Portuguese. It is a different way of communicating. And then we need to translate that not only into another language, but also into the academic conventions of that language, which, by the way, they're not the same in the UK than they are in the United States. There are cultural differences. So that was something I personally suffered. I suffered because we had to work really hard, but we couldn't expect that everybody who was going to contribute to this special issue was going to be a native English speaker. So personally, how do I do it? I think I was fortunate enough to learn it at school when I was growing up. And then I came to live here years later. So that helps enormously. But I still find myself, I'm not, at the same level of my colleagues who are British born and bred. And I suppose that makes a difference. But as I said before, having said all that, it's great that we have a common language and we can communicate.
Definitely. And I think basically what we're doing here is, of course, I guess it's all English, even if there's an accent or, they're saying some words are not correct, but still English. And I guess what this amazing work that you're doing is being an interface, between this culture in Latin America and this new other culture that you're learning. And this is also, or that you're always be learning. So it's not like your colleagues are not you're not maybe as fluent as your colleagues, but there's so much that you experienced that helps this community to understand and this exchanges that you're talking about. So you and Livia are doing this important work of being an interface, from not English speakers and your audience. Livia,
Raquel, I'll just jump in because I wanted to actually sort of thank you for the initiative of having the interpreters here with us today. And this has been a major point for my own dissemination of today's lecture among my networks in Brazil and in Latin America, to be able to present today's session and the eventual recording as something that's much more accessible than ever before. And thanks for the Design History Society who has offered some support for that. But I think the ethos is here. The ethos from the beginning for this series that you've been organizing has been one of multiplicity of languages and also inclusivity. I think with regards to what we are saying, I would suggest also that it is a very interesting mess out there in terms of where do you get your scholarship from, how do you write, and where do you write. I have been feeling, and I've been in academia doing design history for 20 years, and I feel that academia is becoming academia, and some of the publishing outputs, some of that infrastructure, as I called in my talk, of the production of knowledge and exchange, has becoming ever more, increasingly more interested in what we've been calling here different academic conventions or even academic cultures. And I would be very inviting of those who are here, but from Peru, from El Salvador, from Cuba, from Brazil, from not to again forego of that potential fear that they would have to conform to a certain academic convention, to a certain academic linguistic convention, to a certain form of doing academia or research and so on, because there is huge appetite globally, and I'm now speaking from Australia as well, and I have a very good understanding of the South Asian Pacific constituency environment. There's a huge appetite for exchange. So the point of exchange here also applies to the question in which we are always becoming much more sharing our positions rather than having to adopt someone else's position. And so I would invite people to explore that in their scholarship, in the ways in which they use terminology in their writing, the ways in which they disseminate their writing in multiple languages. And technology is very helpful with that, with all this kind of translators and AIs and transcripts, so I think there is enormous room here for us to be bolder and for us to be more, to have more agency in this process. Yeah.
That's great to hear that, because of course, and especially as some design practitioners are not that familiar with academic, language, or if you're not like used to write and publish in a more traditional publishing, peer-reviewed industry is kind of scary. But I guess there are so many ways of sharing and doing research, and nowadays more and more. So I would love to see, how things are going to change, and as you said, being an agent of that change too. We have another question that I wanted to share with you, Livia, and it's going back to that experience. We were talking about the modernist influence in Latin America in general. And the question is from our SoDA member, Richard Stanley. He asks if there is a common reason why Guy Boncipi, Tomás Maldonado, and Maria Vieira, now I don't have the correct reference here, went to the Ulm school in Germany, and was that a personal connection to Max Bill? And Alexandre Wollner, also from Brazil, went to Ulm school. So if you would, I want to invite you to comment on those, exchanges happening back in the 60s and, 70s.
Thanks. Thanks for the question, Stanley. So basically, Guy Boncipi is German. So he's obviously has made a huge impact in Latin American history, design history and design work. He worked with Allende in the Stevenson project, and he worked for a very long time in Argentina and Brazil as well. So he's originally German, and he's originally in HFG alumni. Tomás Maldonado, actually, I would invite you to, if you haven't read the piece by Veronica de Valle in the special issue. It's a fantastic piece because she explores exactly what happens before Maldonado and how Maldonado meets Max Bill. So you're right in thinking that there is a strong connection there, and appreciation for, I mean, they obviously become, they have a common set of interests, aesthetic interests that are linked to their approach to concretism, new concretism in that sort of mid to late 50s. And Maldonado does travel to German just at the time that Otto Eicher, Inge Scholl, and Max Bill were getting together to found the HFG. So, but interestingly, this is not a history of just encounters and how would I say, sort of a benign exchanges, because as we know, there is a rift here between Max Bill and Maldonado in the ways in which they conceptualize design. And Maldonado, interestingly, become the second director of after Bill, and he is much more inclined to push design into what they have developed at the time, a concept of environment, of Umwelt, a concept of design as a modus operandi into the environment. Environment here is not just our ecological environment, but environment as in a system. So design is predicated on this new industrial society culture that is systematic in its approach, that is a system, and that the designer is the professional that has the capacity to intervene in that system and to create that system. So their both apprehension from Max Bill and from Maldonado, the apprehension of aesthetics is very different. It's in that mid of the 1950s when Maldonado assumes the directorship of Ulm. And Alex Wollner, you mentioned that, Raquel, he was a Brazilian who went to Ulm for his undergrad or postgrad, if I'm not mistaken, and he returned to be one of the kind of members of the first. They considered one of the first modern design schools in Rio, in Brazil, and potentially in Latin America, called the AIGA, the Escola Superior de Industrial, which I have already mentioned. And Wollner was one quite faithful disciple of this idea that has been promulgated by Ulm of design as a systemic, modern, industrially driven aesthetics that would intervene in anything from the coffee cup to the housing state, and that was a quote from Max Bill himself. So what I find interesting is that these exchanges, the question was about a few many actors, and these exchanges, they are not explained by one given answer, one sole answer, but they have to be scrutinized more closely, like what I muted myself. Okay, they have to be scrutinized more closely, as Veronica has done in the specialization, and as we are trying to do, for instance, in my current research, which I've been doing in Brazil with a collaborator called Clara Meliandi, who I think is here today. Hello. And the reason this has to be scrutinized more closely is also to overcome some of those modernist myths that we have been talking about in the special issue. So it's easy to write the history of design through the history of biographies of these great people who have traveled, who have conquered, who have done great things. It's more interesting in my view, and it's more it's a bit more like brushing history against the grain, as we say it in historical theory, to start to look at this history from other perspectives, such as of the design students in these design schools that were being implemented in Latin America from, with the participation of some of these Ulmers, as they are called, such as Boncipi, Wollner, even Maldonado has been to Brazil many times for lecturing and teaching. I hope that kind of starts to answer the question, but it's a great question and it's room for a lot of research there.
Thank you, Livia. Yes, Richard, let us know if you want to know more about it. And it's also, I was thinking about, while I was reading the paper, I was thinking about something, several things caught my attention, but one part was specifically that you mentioned the importance of Latin American studies, in the U.S. How that the researchers in the U.S. started getting more interested in Latin American a certain time period, and that it's an amazing for me, like it contextualized a lot of why we do this type of research, and we choose a specific topic, and then how that reflects what is published in the following years. So my question is, I would like to get back to Patricia, is could you comment on, please, that the beginning of the interest in Latin America with Latin American studies and back, in the 70s, and how nowadays, at least I see that the interest in Latin America is getting bigger, I guess, and the special issue, I think reflects that. How was that in the 70s? How is that nowadays? And give a little bit of perspective on that.
Very interesting. This question about Latin American studies. And I think the brief answer to that is that in the post-war period, during the Cold War, there was an obvious interest in the region because of this division of the world. And Latin America had to be aligned with the West. So there was a big interest and a big investment, not just economically, but also intellectually, in supporting the cause of development. So if we were thought of underdeveloped areas of the world, then if we engage in this development, then we would surely sign with this economic system. And that's why there were so many centers for Latin American studies everywhere in the world, and they still exist, and they have done fantastic work. Then when the Berlin Wall fell, for obvious reasons again, the interest in Latin America fell because the region was not considered so relevant, strategically speaking, anymore. And that coincided with cuts in funding, and that had an impact on the scholarship and the number of people engaged in new research and so on. But then now, probably, yes, it's terrible, all that has been going on, as Livia pointed out during her presentation. The model of neoliberalism is in crisis. So perhaps that has something to do with it, or the fact that still Latin America is one of those regions in the world with enormous natural resources. So we are needed, once again. That's my take in it. There may be other reasons, or maybe we have become, as Latin Americans, more confident, and we are promoting ourselves. So that's a question for everybody, I think. What do we think? But the way I see it, it was this huge interest, then the interest fell, and now it's back up again. And surely the reason is ideological, political, and economical.
Livia, do you agree? Would you like to comment, say something else related to that?
It's always good to look at the infrastructure again, Hugo, in terms of the funding for research and what areas of research get funding and why. And we do mention a little bit about that in the special issue with the Perry report and other aspects of how and why some of this interest had risen in the time when they did. And again, I mean, in my own part of the lecture, I was trying to bring all these conversations to the very now, to the very present, because it's so urgent what's going on, both in Latin America and across the world, not only in terms of the rise of neoconservatism and the political turmoils and the rise of fascism, but also with the defunding, with the establishment of research centers, the crisis of humanities across the world, with the crisis in just just shared job and employment frameworks in academia. I mean, to a certain extent, I don't want to foresee the future, play futurology here, but to a certain extent, the scarcity of resources seen in the universities. I'm not entirely familiar with the landscape in the US, and I think it's different because of the endowment schemes and so many other schemes that American universities have been able to tap into. But especially in places where public education has been more central, so the UK, even in Australia and so on, there has been more scarce, the resources to study places such as Latin America will become more scarce, has been more scarce. And I can see that because my scholarship has been very international, my career, I've moved worlds far too often. And for me today, from where I stand, to be able to work on the themes that I want to work on in terms of my research into Latin American design history is almost something I need to do on the side, out of my passion and out of my commitment to the field, to the region, to the methodologies, and to all that we have been discussing today, because there has been an ongoing defunding in this area, as I can see, especially in design, especially not, if we're talking about tropical diseases, it would be something a bit different, but especially in design, especially in humanities, and more particularly and very importantly, in a research into design that sees it as a cultural form, as a cultural phenomenon, not as something that can be easily plugged into STEM subjects, which in itself, within the kind of hierarchies and political power struggles within academia, still has upper hand. So, and we see that in some universities in Brazil. Again, I'm speaking because of the experience I have there, where design departments and heads of school would have tried to shoehorn design into a STEM sort of centers of technology, and design has always kind of been phrased and clothed in this idea of certain centers of technology and innovation and industry, because it is that as well. And this is one of the most beautiful things about this activity that we are studying here, because it's so interstitial, it's so in between economics and aesthetics and cultural expressions and political decisions and technology and innovation. But this overemphasis on design as a STEM subject comes from, or has been driven by, the scarcity of resources for higher education and research and academia as well. So to a certain extent, I feel that that rise of all that interest in Latin America culture, socioeconomic problems, to a certain extent might have been dwindling, but that doesn't mean the knowledge, the production of knowledge has been dwindling in so far that I go back to what I said in terms of our own agency in producing knowledge and sharing that knowledge in venues like this today is ever more present, is ever more pressing as well, because of this broader context, international broader context of knowledge production.
Thank you. Thank you, Livia. So we have one more question, and I think that's our final question. And then, unfortunately, we need to wrap up. So, but our question is from Roberto Montoreanu. So he asks about how design became almost like something homogeneous and influenced by internet and social media. How do you see that? And I would complement saying, how do you see this design in general in Latin America from this research you've been doing, how globalization and internet and social media has been making everything kind of looks the same? So that's not an easy question too, but what are your impressions on that from your research?
I think the problem of having a homogeneous culture it's a very real one, and not just because of the internet. I think we've been going in that direction for some time with globalization. But globalization, I think, yes, it is very accelerated at the moment, but it has been going on since, at least in the Americas, since the 16th century. We live in a global world. We are interconnected. We influence each other all the time. That each region of the world has managed to retain its cultural differences. I think it's credit to the richness there is. And what Roberto says is absolutely right. Because of the internet, there is this, we have this homogeneous culture, Pinterest and all the rest. But I think there is still, you can never guarantee that each one of us is going to be influenced or impacted, or each one of us is going to interpret things exactly in the same way. Something different will come out of it. That's my take on it. But yes, without denying that we have many things. We have a homogeneous culture, but not just the internet or the digital.
Thank you.
That question, how long have we got? Have we got another 3 hours, Raquel?
Not really, but
not
I know,
really.
yeah.
Okay. So let me again sort of talk about these areas of the areas that we think are opening up for research in Latin American design history. The digital is a very, very important one. Again, we are one of the most uptakers in terms of size, number, frequency of use of social media. And we know how misinformation has been thriving across these channels. So your question was about homogeneity, cultural homogeneity, but what makes me think of some really, really, really important work being done by anthropologists on behaviors within the social realm. And I think that design studies, design histories, design, us interested in these questions, have the obligation to really engage with that side of the scholarship, which has been thriving in anthropology, with regards to what has changed in the last 10 years alone. It's such a small period of time, historically speaking. It's a short period of time, historically speaking, but absolutely fundamental for our understanding of changes in behavior, in politics, and in cultural formation, as you suggest. I mean, there's aspects of homogenization, there's aspects of heterogenization, and so on. So I think because of time, I'll just leave it at that. But I would suggest that one of the best things we could be doing as designers, as makers, as design historians, is to engage with fantastic research that has been done, ethnographic research really, that has been done by some anthropologists in this area of the digital, so that we can take key concepts, key methodologies, key understandings from those areas of knowledge and understand a bit more in depth what is our what we verify, what we see happening, but also how can we intervene if you're a maker, if you're a designer and you are bothered by such homogenization, for instance. So how can you therefore intervene in your making processes, having been informed by those research? And I think here, that's my last sentence. I will again mention how research is not just for researchers. And I think, Raquel, you did say something along those lines. And I think that made my heart jump with joy, because research is not just for us in academia, in the ivory tower, in our lovely offices, writing up papers that are going to be stuck behind firewalls. And by the way, our papers are not stuck behind firewalls for this month. So go and grab them. But research is for makers, it's for designers who are conscious beings, who are intervening in the fabric of reality with every single project that make. And I think this question leads to that claim. So go out, read, and engage with research, and engage with what's being done on the ground.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Livia. If you have any references that you'd like to share, maybe with Roberto, we can do that, because, we have his contact. And if you're fine with that, Roberto, we can follow, share some references with you. So I want to thank you so much, Livia and Patricia. I know it's very late for you, Patricia, already. So thank you for staying awake.
Thank you, Raquel. Thank you. And thank you, everybody who joined us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for all the volunteers that helped. Thank you for the interpreters again. And I want to invite you to check our website, sodabaltimore.com and baltimore.aij.org, to check on our upcoming events. We'll come back with the series next year. Thank you all again for joining us. And Livia, you want to say goodbye? If you like,
I don't want to say goodbye. Can I stay? No, it's because look, it's again, I couldn't thank you enough, Raquel, and the societies that have been putting this together, because that has been possibly one of the first opportunities that Patricia and I had to actually speak to the so-called constituencies that we really had in our minds for the whole duration of the 4 years in which we undertook the project. So it almost feels like it's finally out there, and we're finally talking to the readers and to the people we want to engage with. So thank you massively for coming, contributing with your questions, Raquel for being this diligent powerhouse behind it, and the societies for putting this all together. I'm thrilled, and this doesn't have to be the last time we get together either. So let's just aim for more.
Yes, I'm down. So thank you again. We're gonna close our cameras, and we're gonna leave the chat open for a couple of minutes if people want to, because there are a lot of things that we shared. And I hope you all have a good evening or good rest of your days, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.